Welcome to the PantheonPlus Rewind. So what exactly is the PantheonPlus Rewind? Well, everything we do at Pantheon Plus is about community at the core. It's why our first jump into the Pantheon community was our website and trying to network or create a place for people to learn about Pantheon from what we believe to be trusted or positive sources. Fast forward a year and a half, we're excited to have Pantheon Plus U and Therek's perception of Pantheon, aside from any of the other content videos that we make. That said, we want to provide more to the community, and we want to continue to build our team in a way where we have creative minds working together to continue to push the overall amazing community we have and helping foster that into a great future. Pantheon Plus Rewind is a way for us to look back at the previous week of news, discussion, and content throughout the community and shed a little bit of light on the different social media platforms and all these discussions that are taking place. We'll highlight Reddit, forums, Twitter, Facebook discussion, and we'll talk about topics that are at the core of the community's discussion. We'll highlight contributors to those conversations, try to answer questions if we can about those discussions, and even give our thoughts on them. We'll also highlight any VR communication and also any current content creator releases, schedules, anything that may come up with the content creator community. Now, rather than doing a super lengthy show, we've decided to do this in a podcast format and in a smaller package than our normal hour-and-a-half episodes of Pantheon Plus U. We'll explore the plus side of our name, so to speak, and quickly talk to the important genre-specific news as well. So with the help of my peers here with me, Therek.
Hello, everybody.
And Omega Contagion.
How's it going?
We look forward to bring this to you weekly, and I really couldn't be more excited to do it with this super talented team. So what do you guys think? You ready for episode 1?
I'm ready to go, man.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So let's go ahead and jump into our first topic. This week in Visionary Realms news and notes. So VR gave us quite a bit to talk about, guys, this week, and I'm going to go through those quickly. And as always, this is not going to be a full readout of the different content that's out there. I think more than anything, we want to make you guys aware of what's out there, and then we want to push you forward to go experience it for yourself. So we're going to talk first about the VR dev stream that took place on April 2nd. They showed off the Shaman class. We went over more in depth on that on our Pantheon Plus U show, but I want to give you guys just some quick points. And again, go check this out in its entirety. Go check out the episode of Pantheon Plus U and give your comments in the comment section here, since this will also be on YouTube. So first, the progeny system was very much alive. I know you guys were both pretty excited to hear that. That was a standout.
Definitely. Haven't heard anything about that in a while.
Yeah,
definitely not in a while.
It has been a bit. So that was interesting because even just hearing the word progeny, everyone was like, oh, okay. We also got a lot more in depth on the mastery points and how they're earned. They'll drop from quests. They're going to drop from us. You can gain them from a leveling bar that's going to be separate from your experience bar. You're going to get them through actually leveling. And they even said you're going to be able to sell them. And it could grant you, mastery with these items that you might need a crafter for. So more community type things. That was a big standout to me. I don't know how you felt about that, Omega.
I thought that was great. I mean, anything that you can do to have more community interaction, it's awesome for the game and the genre as a whole.
Yeah. And quickly get through these points. So you'll be able to see all the spells upgrades without seeing them. They're actually going to upgrade the codex even more. So you're going to get to see more of the spell detail, which is nice. You're going to have a choice to whether to put your mastery into spells or into your character directly. I thought that was a really interesting point, Therek. I don't know. I mean, what did that stand out for you, that you're going to have this choice between your spells or your character?
Yeah, it totally did. I mean, it just gives you one extra level of customization for your character and to create that identity that gives you that unique persona. I liked it.
Yeah. So then we got into the shaman itself. There's a lot of shaman details. I'm not covering a ton of them here. Go check that out. But the shaman pet's going to have 2 forms, a spirit or a physical form, and they're going to enable different things. So the shaman passive originally was your ability to regen mana and HP out of combat and in combat at the same rate. And they sort of took that and tied it to your pet. And some people may say, oh, that kind of sucks, but it makes your pet a little more meaningful in a class where the pet really felt not so meaningful. But your pet's going to have to be in spirit form. Now, the other side of it is you can turn it into a physical form, deal some damage, but now you'll also be able to sacrifice it in its physical form to do your res, which is a lot better than having to die to do your res. So I'm a lot happier to hear that. The downranking of spells will no longer be a thing. Phenomenal. I like that. Less spell bloat. And they're also going to, another piece of the Living Codex, they're actually going to allow you to macro features into your spells through the spell book. So you're going to be able to macro outputs. You're going to be able to do all kinds of cool stuff to your spells within the book. That's really big news, I think, especially for a lot of min-maxers and people who want maximum efficiency. We were also introduced to what they're calling the state of being in spells and effects that seemingly at this point are really going to create a lot of synergy between classes, and it'll change their abilities and how they impact an enemy or a person depending on their state. And finally, the big standout for me was that classes are going to have their own perception pieces. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later as well, so I'm not going to get into a ton of detail about that. The next thing that did come out, and this actually just came out yesterday, so we rushed to get this in, was the Pantheon VIP Roundtable. And there was a lot of great insight from the programmers, Jason and Todd from the team. So I'm going to give you just really quick snippets of what stood out to me. It's an hour long. If you're a programmer, you will love this. They get into some detail on how they program. I'm going to leave a lot of that out of here. So first of all, they gave a lot of great insight on tool development and a great sense that the team is progressing pretty well. There's a lot that they're working on, but admittedly kind of said that nothing's necessarily hard. So they seem like what they want to do, they're not worried about that. It's just about testing it. I talked a little bit about Bard and Necro abilities. So everyone out there who really wants more about Bard and Necro, they talked about the fact that they already have abilities that they're testing. And they did say they're not saying that their classes are done, so nobody get crazy, but that they are in concept understanding how they want the abilities to work for these classes. They had a fun story about code breaking. These two quick stories I thought were funny. They put on the ability for NPCs to attack each other, and it was based on their factions. Well, something happened where one of the generic, and Theric, I think you would think this is hilarious, but the generic faction setting, it was like, they said it was like 13. For some reason, certain factions just didn't like it, and some kind of coding piece. So they went into a testing session, and all of a sudden, all the NPCs were just like killing each other everywhere. It was like this all-out war.
the war of neutrality. Nobody liked the neutral faction disposition.
Yeah, could you imagine you're walking into a town and it's just chaos? It's so good. I would have loved to see that. And then the last one they talked about, this is the funniest one, and I think they've talked about this in the past, but they re-highlighted it. There was a problem with Fiend Death when it came out, or Feign, how people want to say it. But Fiend Death, there was a singular line that the programmer fixed it. He wrote this one line of code. It's pretty simple. All of a sudden, none of the crafting system worked. And it wasn't right away that they realized it. So like they went to check the crafting system, all of a sudden none of it worked. And it turns out like it was this one line of code. So when you guys are sitting here like, oh, they need to get this game out, like there's so much precise importance in how things are done and create these goofy little things you'd never think of until it was in. So I thought that was pretty funny and something to share. The other piece too they did talk about was pet classes. I'm not a pet fan, but if you're a pet fan, you probably will like this. That both the developers that were on here, both Jason and Todd, are both huge pet fans. They play pet classes. They love pet classes, and it's a big priority for them. And they said that there is a lot of great decisions being made and that that's working really well where it's at right now, even though we haven't seen it. So that was really good. And then this is an interesting story. One of the last things I'm actually going to talk about here is they told a story about Brad. And you know how I am. If I hear a story about Brad, guys, I want to hear it. I want to go on. But he's like, hey, and think about this too, and comment as much as you guys want on this, but I think it's funny. Brad went up to a developer and said, this is what I want. And he had this idea. I need it so that at a certain time of night, a named wolf is going to walk out of this cave and he's going to howl. And when he howls, all the wolves around them are going to start to gather around him. And they're going to start walking down the path in a formation together. This only happens at certain times of night in this one cave area. And if anyone gets near, the wolves are much more highly aggressive. So they're going to attack in a big way. And you know, he's like, yeah. And they implemented it. And it's funny because he said, you know, it's been around since the early pre-alpha phases. And he's not sure if a lot of people have noticed it yet. But it's one of those really cool things that makes the world alive. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Oh, that's really interesting. And that, you know, that just sounds like something Brad would have said, right? Like he was such a visionary and his ideas were so a part of what made him special, right? And something like that just makes so much sense. And I love to hear a story. I hadn't heard that story before. And I'm so excited to hear that that's something that's actually in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's. I think it's going to be moments that you stumble upon like that are going to be a big deal. So those are the two big content pieces they put out. I want to highlight a couple things from Twitter, and I know Theric, you're going to get into them a little more in depth, so I'm not going to go crazy about it. But on VR, they did, of course, with everything going on, they said, "What is one word to describe isolation?" And I'm not going to go into a ton of details about the why, but you guys know. And it was funny because I really saw gamers making the most out of it, and a lot of them said, the common word was normal. I don't know what's that say about us guys.
Yeah, man, I've been doing this for a number of years. I am designed for self-isolation.
It's kind of funny. I mean, it's if you can't smile at things like this, then what are you doing? You got to be able to smile in the good and the bad times, and that made me laugh quite a bit. Nathan and I think Bazgrim both said that, and a lot of people did. But the other one that came up a lot was necessity or necessary. So just everybody, stay safe out there. We can't all play Pantheon together if we don't stay safe through it. So the next piece that they asked about was if servers should have preferred time zones. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this because Theric, I think you have a little bit about this too. But I'm going to give you guys just my thoughts here. I do not think they should have the servers broken up in time zones because time zone doesn't mean much. And I've seen a lot of people on Twitter in their responses saying things like, well, you should be able to have, the best ping or the best location. Time zone and ping have nothing to do with one another. I live in Florida. If they put a server in Maine, I'm not going to have very good ping, and that's in my time zone. So I think that ultimately, and this may sound harsh, but if you have bad internet, you're going to have a bad connection. And if you have good internet, you're going to have a good connection. It doesn't really matter where you're connecting to, as long as you're within your country or your region. So I do think that United States, Europe and Asia need their own servers. But outside of that, I think that, when I ran a guild, we just picked a time that worked for the time zones and for people in their jobs and careers. And just as simply putting it as time zones, I don't think will help much. That's kind of my thought on it. Did want to give a shout out though. There's a user on Twitter, Josh A1304, and he said that if raids are instance, this is important. So there is definitely an importance to knowing, when you're going to be able to go with your guild. But I say let the guild and the community handle it. When the community speaks, we listen. Let's dig into social media and see what they're talking about.
Okay, so from there, we'll actually pick up on that same discussion about server time zones. We'll go over to PantheonMMO.com and see what's going on in the forums over there. So the discussion that you were talking about, Minus, with regard to time zones was actually posted over there by Nafel. And if anybody reads the forums regularly, you'll probably recognize Nafel as he's a longtime member of the community, and he really posts well thought out and articulated questions on the forums quite often. He's also the creator of PantheonCrafters.com. So if you have an interest in crafting, go over and check out that site. So to go back to his question, though, so in the general discussion, his question was, quote, should game servers have preferred time zones instead of simply regions? So like you said, minus Europe, US, Asia. And would it make a difference for you and your play schedule or not? So the topic got quite a few views, over 500 views the last time I checked, and over 30 replies. And it was actually picked up, like you said, by VR and tweeted out for further discussion. Now, in terms of the responses, there was some support and there were some concerns that were also raised. So I'm going to go through just a few of the responses, and then I'll highlight one in particular. So the first response, somebody said, no, like you said, Minus, don't segregate the community any further than needed. Let the players sort out the scheduling. Somebody else said they prefer a diverse server population and players from multiple time zones. Somebody else said it depends on the server populations and how many servers there are at the time. Another person said find people to play with at the same time. It's not really a big deal. Somebody who was supportive of the idea said they see a lot of attrition or absenteeism in other games, specifically with raids, due to time differences. So they were supportive of it. Somebody said it's an important consideration for a socially focused MMO, which we know Pantheon is. And somebody else commented that it seems in line with Brad's idea of a matchmaking tool for Pantheon to match people based on their region or time zone. Somebody else said choice is the important thing and not auto placement, which I would agree with definitely. They said gaming schedules and time zones don't necessarily align. And then the last point, their last response was, how does it fit into the caravan system? So, and not to go in too deep on the caravan system, but basically what that's been proposed as is a way of staying with your group when you're offline. So if your group is continuing into a certain area, you'll log back in, you'll still be with them. So the response in particular, though, that I want to highlight came from Balder, another longtime member of the community on the forums. And he had a really innovative idea, which he described as being server time. So I'll just read a piece of what he said. He said, quote, "I don't think servers should be limited to regions, as it limits the ability to meet new people and interact with some of the community. With that being said, I'm all for the presence of server time. As someone with experience running and managing a guild, the presence of server time is crucial for setting up events and being able to communicate those times effectively. For example, if I were to set something up for 8 p.m. on Friday night, 8 p.m. holds no distinctive value based on time zones or other regions people may live in. I would instead have to say something like 8 p.m. Eastern, Standard, Mountain, whatever. However, this can pose issues for people that either can't convert the time or for other reasons can't figure it out. It's much easier to state that an event is happening at 8 p.m. server time because usually people can just look at the time or figure it out based on the time that the server they're playing on. So, and like you said, Minus, VR actually picked up on this question, tweeted it out. So it's obviously something they're pretty interested in hearing the community's opinion on. But Omega, what do you think about this piece? We didn't really hear from you yet.
I would be of the opinion that separating the servers too much is not a great idea. I think just having even an East and a West would be as far as I would go for like a North America thing. But in terms of Pantheon, and I might be in the minority, but I think of having like the best possible ping as really only mattering in like a Twitch shooter or something where I'm really heavily competing with somebody else. So in a PvE setting of Pantheon and, hanging out with friends and just going through content, I don't think of, having 140 ping versus 100 ping is really going to be a huge deal to me. And,
Right.
but what Balder said about having server time, I think that's a great idea. Like there's a lot of times that things get confused with time zones. And recently in my life, me and Budrick were doing a show and he's in the other side of the world. And we messed up on our conversion and we had to replan. So having a server time, I think as long as everybody knows their own conversion with that server time, I mean, that's a great idea.
I got to tell you that whatever we do in life and learn in life, I've never been able to successfully just at a whim convert time. But I think it is a good thing that Boulder brought up there, because having server time is important, and specifically when we just talked about an event that would happen at midnight server time, with a wolf coming out or things spawning at server time. That's also pretty important to know. So good stuff.
Right. Yeah, and I'm on the same sort of opinion that I want less servers rather than more. I think it's important not to segregate the community too much. And MMO is all about having people around, and having a population on a server is pretty important. So I'll move on to the next topic, and this also was on the forums at PantheonMMO.com, and it was a discussion that's been had in other places. We had it on PantheonPlus U one time, and it's regarding the race class matrix in Pantheon. That is to say, which races can be which classes. So the original poster on the forums was Grimseath, and it's in general discussion. He writes, quote, class and race restrictions need to change. Looking at the class race matrix, it doesn't look great to me. Now, I know the devs have lore reasons as to why each race can only be certain classes, but I'd love it if they would reconsider for various reasons. So again, this got a lot of views, over 350 and 25 or so replies. Here's some of the responses that it received. Somebody said, fine with it as it is. Doing an all, so all classes, all races, feels bland. Somebody said, make more choices or even all available, but make there be some consequences to that. And that's an idea that I'll actually pick up on a second in another response. Somebody else said most players, well, this was interesting actually, most players will play humans. So we know that humans can be any class. So if the large percentage of the players are playing humans, they already have that. And making other races more restrictive makes sense because the RP crowd is the one that's attracted to other races more than humans. Somebody else said like restrictions based on the lore, it plays to the strength of the world around them. And finally, somebody said, coming from a Dungeons and Dragons background, they like the limited race class selection. So the highlighted response for this was from Counterfletch, and I think he had an amazing idea about how to do this, and it actually got a lot of support in subsequent responses to his comment. So he said there are different types of gamers and they want different things. He separated them into 3 categories. So there's min-maxers who want the best combos. So they typically don't mind restrictions on combos. They weren't interested in anyway, and they prefer their teammates also not be a suboptimal combo. So min-maxers prefer the restrictions as they are. Lore-focused gamers usually favor some sort of restrictions as a way to keeping other players and the world more broadly consistent with the game more. Creatives like an open world with a maximum potential and love seeing unusual and interesting characters. So we can't satisfy all 3 groups, but we can come up with something more flexible than the current yes-no approach. So for instance, allow restricted combos in a way that makes them rare. That way min-maxers won't care too much due to the scarcity. Some lore people will like it because it's rare, but they can also dislike it a bit if there were no exceptions, no matter what. But the creatives will absolutely love it because they're creative and they get to be rare. So for the 2 groups, it's not a big deal. And for the 3rd, it's a huge positive. Now, how do we do this? So his idea was to have a player unlock a race after getting another character of the same race to max level. And he specifically said the progeny system, which we mentioned earlier, in which characters can retire a character from max level and then start a new character. Again, we don't have a lot of details about the progeny system, but this might be a really good way of doing that. What do you guys think about that?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding this all correctly. He's saying that if you get a character to max level or you do the progeny thing, that would then unlock all the other classes for that race?
Or maybe just 1 or 2 or
right.
Either, yeah, something like that, basically.
Definitely an interesting idea. I think, depending what they have in mind for expansions and long-term stuff for how the races will interact, I think it's an interesting idea, for sure.
I think you have to make if an ogre wants to be a monk, then they're going to have to mate with someone who can be a monk. And then if that monk wants to mate with an ogre, that's up to them. No, it's not a bad idea. I like the restrictions. I think lore's important. I know that you do. So I think that there's just things that don't make sense. And don't get me wrong, things like paladin that are linked to 2 classes, it's kind of like, or 2 races, I'm sorry. It's kind of like, but it's going to add something to the game. There's going to be a very distinct paladin class, the look of them. And there's going to be a lot of positives. I think that there's more positives than negatives. And I think people just get over it once they make their character and start gearing up.
I think just to comment on that, like VR is making a lot of very specific decisions for specific reasons. And without getting into the game and really understanding it, like we can theory craft all day about, I want more of this, I want different things. But I mean, leave it to them to make the vision that they're making.
I could do a whole show about that statement.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, good. Okay, so lastly from the forums, I'm just going to do a quick shout out to someone that I've had a lot of back and forth communication with there specifically, and that's Ben and I. He's an author. He's a big lore nerd like me who's written a piece of fan fiction called Emensal's Shadow. This piece of fan fiction is amazing. It's been ongoing for quite a while now in separate parts. And basically it tells the tale of humans on Terminus during the Deicide War. Ben and I is a very, very talented writer. He's got really well-developed characters, an engaging plot, and his depth of knowledge of the official lore is something to be appreciated and considered because he knows it really well. If you're saying
somebody's lore is depth, then that blows my mind.
Well, hey, and I know, I appreciate that, but he knows it very, very well. And that's why we've had so many conversations. So if you're into fan fiction, go to that section on the forums, check it out, give it a read, leave a comment for him, tell him that you like it.
Tell him you heard about it on PantheonPlus Rewind.
That's right. That's right. Well, I communicated with him and I did tell him I was going to give him a shout out. So he knows. So he would appreciate that.
All right. So I was going to jump in here and talk a little bit about the forums. And I have this huge rant I wrote up and what I wanted to say. I'm going to keep it really short. The ultimate thing I want you guys to get out of everything we do with community here is don't avoid communicating with the community on social media because of all the negative hordes that show up, which is really one horde of like 4 people that just complain about everything. Don't worry when they try to overwhelm conversations and they become echo chambers for each other. I've been a victim in the past of avoiding certain social media because of it. And then I realized they're just the same group of people repeating themselves. Just ignore them, keep moving on, and keep using these community tools to spread positivity. And the big one here that made me say this is that I was really thankful. There was some community people who made a post about Joppa being on our show. It was really positive, and it was really humbling to hear some of the stuff. And it immediately became this huge debate about limited action set. And you had 4 or 5 people post what felt like 700 times. I couldn't even make it through the entirety of the forum post because it just was the same thing and just huge walls of text and them quoting each other to say good job. And here's all I'm going to say. I read through as much as I could, and I understand why some people want limited action set. And I have one question to the group there that has that issue. If you have an issue with limited action set because you're afraid you're going to go into a fight, and this is a lot of what was said, that you're going to go into a fight unprepared and possibly die. This is not a solo MMORPG game. This is a group game. And if you really think that because you aren't prepared because of something that comes up, that the other 5 members of your group and what you do have are not capable of getting through that situation, that's never brought up. It's never brought up in this debate. It's always about me, 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 me. It's a very selfish discussion about how they're not going to be ready. You have 5 other members of your group that are going to be ready. You have 5 other members of the group that have all their skills. This isn't 8 skills that you have to beat every situation. It's 8 times the number of people in your group. And I think it's important to understand that that's why this is important, because this is made to be a group MMORPG. So rant off. But again, don't let these people that are negative in the community affect you from communicating, building relationships, because it's probably one of the best things about me doing what I'm doing is just the amount of networking and people I've got to meet. So don't get turned off by the negativity, guys. Just power through it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it actually links well to what I'm going to say next, because we're going to go over to Reddit and see what's going on over there, which is a site that I've avoided myself just for that very reason, but more recently have been more inclined to check out. So this is the Pantheon MMO subreddit. And there was an interesting question posed about the perception system. So this question came from a user named BlueTree4, and he had a question about the perception dialogue that we saw on the Fairthale live stream. So his question was referencing the dialogue between Ko's character and the old one, and how the old one was saying he comes from a different time period and how the flow of timelines has been disrupted, and the fact that Ko is playing a level 40 shaman during the stream, and which made him wonder, is the perception quest he played any chance a shaman-only quest line? So he goes on to say, here's the thing. I remember the devs saying for a while that one of the goals of the perception system is to help make each class feel unique, and therefore there will be many perception quests which are only available to certain classes. Judging by how shamans are stated in the lore to have a special kind of vision which allows for them to talk to spirits, peer into alternate timelines, and so on, I could see this being the case here. In other words, maybe a wizard or a warrior might not even be able to see the old one and by extension initiate dialogue with him that Ko is scrolling through. So the responses were not many on this one. I did respond myself because I wanted to make sure he knew it was a really cool and insightful question. And I hadn't actually thought of that. And I did a video about this exact conversation not that long ago. And it never occurred to me that maybe a shaman, because the character was a shaman, that was the only reason that he could communicate. So I do think I could see something like this being in Pantheon. Erikai mentioned in responses, who's a member of the community as well, even if this wasn't one, let's hope VR is doing this for others. And another user threw a little bit of cold water on the idea, sort of just saying that he didn't believe it was a shaman-only quest. It was more to do with the stone that was clicked on, the magical properties innate in that. And then coincidentally, just at the end of the last developer stream a couple days ago, there was a question from the Twitch chat, which actually asked this exact question. Kane said, quote, will shamans discover unique perception pings from dead and or ancestors, especially after some type of ritual? And Chris Joppa Perkins, who we know is the creative director, responded, all of the classes will have their own class-flavored aspects of the perception system. You're going to see several points of content and experiences based on your class within the perception system. Obviously, ancestry, time, age walking, and those things are a huge part of the Pantheon shaman. So this is very, very cool in my mind. It's a great piece of information that we got from Chris, and it intrigues me a lot. So
definitely adds to the depth of class meaning, like the meaning of classes and the individuality. That's a huge bring up. It's a really big point. And I think that even people who aren't super lore fans, it's going to still be really meaningful.
Yes, definitely. So we'll go at another Reddit thread that was brought up, and this is by a user named Donler. And he said, Visionary Realms should address the game economy experience exploit mitigation before it happens. To give a little bit more depth about what he said, he just was looking for more information about how they're trying to sort of stay ahead of the curve and deal with exploits or high-level bugs that affect games greatly. He goes on to link a bunch of examples from different games that are sort of well-known exploits that happened that either ruined the economy or made some sort of really negative impact on the game world. And then the responses to this were basically saying no developer intends for bugs or exploits. It's prevented through thorough testing, which is a really good point, and something that VR is obviously very aware of in their testing process. And somebody else said it's safe to assume they're actively addressing this, and there really is no golden egg solution. Somebody else said all games have bugs or exploits, and it's just the complexity of games. That's their nature. And lastly, somebody brought up anti-hacking measures, and perhaps they could speak to this, which is something that they definitely could call out if needed.
They had a very, very small piece on that in the VIP roundtable that just came out about anti-hacking. They said you can't go into super depth on it because then you're giving info. But there is a tiny piece to that, so anyone who's interested in that can get a little bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand why they wouldn't want to give too much detail about that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
I just want to jump in and say I love exploits. When I find them in a game, I'm that guy who does it, far more than he should to gain the upper hand. And it's just one of those things. Like as a player, you got to decide if you're going to be that guy who's going to exploit it. Like in Grand Theft Auto, I sold the same car over and over and over again with the dupe glitch to make billions, and I loved it.
It's funny because I would say that I'm not that guy, but when I find it and it's useful, like in Fallout, you could sell ammo a certain way and get like infinite caps, then buy it back and sell it. And I did quite a bit of that, so I'd have infinite power cells, so I could just be a big beast walking around in a power suit. So I would typically say I try my best to avoid them, but sometimes I am
your own worst enemy.
Infected by the need. Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay, and then we'll finish up over on Facebook. And no real specific discussions on Facebook this week, but there were certainly a lot of questions going back to the self-isolation thing that you mentioned earlier, Minus. Just people asking, what are you playing to pass the time since the world's on lockdown? So people looking for ideas and game suggestions. And a lot of people are going back to old MMOs or even other genres. The Pantheon community seems to be looking for that one game that scratches the itch until Pantheon launches. But as we know, that's easier said than done. And that's why we're all so anxious for Pantheon to launch. Some of the games that do seem to have found some traction right now, though, are Lord of the Rings Online, Elder Scrolls Online, and a few others. And I think Chase Masters, who's one of the moderators over at the Facebook groups, had a really, really good quote that I'm going to read because I really like how he said it. And it just sort of speaks to what we're all going through. He said, "We hope everyone is faring well during this time, trying time for the entire world. I'd argue because of our common bond, we're probably one of the most skillful groups at physical self-isolation and combating boredom compared to most others. We'll make it through this." He said, "Early signs are beginning to look up on many fronts. In the meantime, we have Norath, Middle-earth, Tamriel, Azeroth, Tyria, and the Verse, and many more places to safely socialize in. Thanks to our members that have been welcomed and other members to join them in their game and their groups. Best wishes to everyone." And that's a look at the community discussion.
Just what are those creators up to out there?
Okay, looking into the content creators quickly here, us at Pantheon Plus, we have spent some time with with a new MMORPG coming out called, and I'm going to say it wrong, Valere. And just a couple quick thoughts. I had a lot of fun with this game in its early stages. I felt the need to keep playing to progress my strength, even though they're pretty limited on enemy types. It still felt good to go from type to type. And I felt very lost in the world all the time. It was very big for a small pre-alpha phase. The gathering and crafting felt important. I really had a blast playing this game. And we even got a chance to play it with the developer. And he actually said it was the first time he had ever played the game in a group just playing it. And we went, Theric was with me, we went and grouped up with a bunch of people, and we went and took on some world bosses, and I died like crazy. Even when we killed it, Theric, I died and watched it. That was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. I called it a strategic coaching moment. So I died so that I could watch the fight and give feedback, right? But you guys can check out playvalor.com to see that game. And we did put the streams up on YouTube in our streaming section. So you can check out that game. It's a very early on pre-alpha game, but it's pretty cool. We also had the PantheonPlus U developer stream, which we talked about earlier, the recap, so you guys can check that out as well. Bazgrim has had a few different things happen. He always does a watch party during the VR stream. So they talk about it. He sort of reacts to it. So he did that. And I'm sure we're going to see a recap of it with his Bazgrim News Flash, or what's it called, the Baz Flash. A quick 1 minute video we'll probably see coming soon. And he also did put a video out on the climbing system that you can check out hopefully soon on Pantheon.Plus when we launch the new website. But for now, check it out on his YouTube page. And definitely make sure you give him a follow. NathanNapalm, one of my best friends in the community and lunatic of creativity, which I like to call him. It's unrelated directly to Pantheon, but it had a lot of the puppets he's created for the Pantheon community. He made a choose your own adventure dungeon crawl with puppets, and it's ridiculous.
It is so awesome. I've played it, I think, 3 times now, and I have not won. I keep dying.
You haven't won. That's awesome.
It took me 2 tries to get through it, but it is so creative. His mind, man. I don't know how that guy comes up with these things, but there's at least 2 songs in there, by the way, in case you haven't tried it. And you've liked the Napalm songs. Oh, I would just leave that out there.
That's incredible. So please check that out if you want a really good time. Again, it has the puppets that have been inspired by the Pantheon videos. And then he did put out 2 videos this week. One about like what it's like to play in first person and how he thinks it's going to feel in Pantheon. And another about like instance diverse shared world type of gaming, and a really good theory. He's played a ton of games as well. He has really good insight. So check that out. And then BattleAxTheater, Def and Punk actually continued a 2-part interview series with the creator of Saga of Leucemia on BattleAx Live. And if you guys aren't familiar with BattleAx Live, that airs Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Goes anywhere between an hour and 2 hours, depending on who their guest is. They kind of cover all kinds of different things about MMORPGs and just gaming in general, technology in general, and all that kind of stuff. But that's it for the content creators this week. We'll keep you updated every week.
The Plus in Pantheon Plus. Here's your MMORPG news.
All right, I guess on to other MMO news. There's a lot that happened in the last week and a half for our genre. First up, Chronicles of Valyria. As of March 25th, 2020, Soulbound Studios and production on Chronicles of Valyria has shut down. Shortly after the first playable build was put out to the backers, which is about 1-ish week before, as well as a failed attempt to gain more funds through a Settlers of Valyria round of funding, Jeremy Walsh, also known as Caspian, has shut down development of the game and laid off all the employees. He details the shutdown in a long and largely unapologetic letter on the game's website dubbed State of Valyria Into the Abyss. He basically just says, turns out we're out of money, gotta shut it down. Now, Jeremy Walsh has a history of butting heads with the community over the years for many reasons, but mostly it's just people who are voicing their concerns about what's happening with the game and their lack of transparency when they're going to be able to play something. Right now, there's a large number of backers who are organizing a class action lawsuit against Soulbound Studios. I'm not sure what kind of grounds they have. I don't know the ins and outs of Kickstarter and how that works, but it's being organized by the higher tier backers from the Kingdom of Boardwheel. If anyone listening has pledged to that game and they want to get in on that lawsuit, you could potentially find them. I think probably in the forums is the best place right now. The main kicker for me is after they announced this shutdown, they went and deleted all the transaction history from the website, which might be a big problem.
It's interesting. We've heard a lot of people kind of compare this to Pantheon. This game's nothing like Pantheon. Nothing. Do your research.
No, it's really not. I think from the get-go, this game was really ambitious, and they couldn't pull it together. This news is sad enough for the backers, but as most of the upcoming MMOs are crowdfunded, I think it's safe to say that many people are worried about the idea of crowdfunding a game as a whole. For me, I just got to say, trust in Pantheon. I really believe in VR and their ability to put it together. But how do you guys feel?
Yeah, I have the same thoughts on it. I've watched a couple of videos about this. It wasn't a game that I was following closely, but I've watched a couple of videos sort of giving an overview, and it seems like night and day between what's going on with that development process and what's been going on with Pantheon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy for somebody who doesn't follow either process very closely to sort of say, oh, they're the same. But no, it's like you both said, they're not the same at all.
Yeah, totally.
And to be honest, I'm just not even interested in what they were trying to do. I think there's this thing going on right now where every MMORPG comes out says they're trying to take it back to when it was hard and we're going to make it old school. But that is such a generic statement. It really doesn't have anything to do with what the game's going to play like. And the theory on how these two games are going to play couldn't be more different.
Next up, Last Oasis. March 26th, Last Oasis launched into early access. I believe it's on Steam. It's a survival MMO with a pretty interesting take on the genre. Players will need to utilize constructed mobile bases to move throughout the world in a never-ending race against time. The game world is literally burning, and the walls of flames are constantly on the move. It's a really interesting cycle because, in front of you is this giant wall of ice that you can't get past, and behind you is this giant wall of fire, and you're just stuck in the middle in this constantly ever-changing state. But the launch of the game was plagued with all sorts of server and connectivity issues, largely unplayable for many players. The developers, Donkey Crew, have decided to take the servers down for an entire week and offer full refunds regardless of your playtime. There's some comparison here with some other indie titles that released recently, most notably Wolcen. Just want to know your guys' thoughts.
You guys know I have a lot of thoughts on that as being a big fan of Wolcen.
Yeah.
This is an interesting topic, and again, another one that I could go on for hours, and I won't do that to you guys here. But this day and age, game launches are very hard. There's a lot more in game launches, even in single player games, we're seeing it. There's a lot more factors in these games now, and especially when you see AAA studios struggling in launching, you need to expect that indies are going to, especially when their game overperforms. And I'm not sure how Last Oasis did with their launch and how many people jumped in. But, Wolcen was expecting like tens of thousands of people and hit 1 million. You can't be prepared for that. You have to purchase server load. You're not going to purchase server load if you don't think you're going to have 2 million people playing. You're not going to pay for server load for 2 million people. It's a huge cost. So you're going to pay for what you think you're going to do and maybe a little bit more. And you don't know. And I'm going to tell you guys, this is an important thing. And I'm happy you brought this up because if you're a Pantheon fan, this is going to happen. This is going to happen at launch. And I'm not knocking VR. There is no way they're going to be able to predict how popular this game is going to be.
Yeah. It's just the nature of launching a game.
100%.
Yeah. I'm just glad to see that they tried to do the right thing, and they took the servers down and they gave refunds to people regardless of time played. I think that's a pretty cool way of doing it and the right thing to do.
Well, my honest opinion, I'm actually not a big fan of the refund part. I know I'm going to get burned on that. You need to know what you're buying. When you're buying an indie game, you need to know what you're getting. Like, you don't go to the store and buy salmon and take a bite of it and be like, this isn't cereal.
Why you don't do that?
Yeah, and I get it, but like refunds can really destroy an indie company. It can literally put a game under for being successful.
Yeah.
And I know that a lot of people don't like hearing that. And like I said, I'm probably going to get beat up a little for that. But that's why I do not want Pantheon to launch on Steam. Because I do not want them to have to abide by that return policy and people just demanding refunds on the forums and stuff there. So
I guess it's just a matter of how much goodwill they think that buys, right? Is it better for them to do that? Do they lose more money or do they lose more of the future potential money by offering this making this available to the players?
Mm-hmm. All right, next up, Ashes of Creation. March 27th, some happier and very well-timed news. Ashes of Creation had their world preview for the Alpha 1 of their game. I watched it, and I was very impressed with what I saw. They showed off some combat, some mounts, an extensive dive into the node system and how to progress your village nodes up through the tiers, and what that looks like in the game. They detailed how to become a mayor and what that means. They showed some vendors, fully functional. They started a citywide community build project, which was really cool to me, and I hope we see more on this soon, to build an armorsmith building. And everyone in the area had to go around and collect resources and, contribute as a city to building this high-grade building. I'm not sure if you could craft in it when it was done or if it was just a vendor type of thing, but it was really cool. The animation was a little bit cutesy for my taste, but I think for what they're going for and the game's aesthetic in general, it was cool to see it constructed over time. I think it works well. Eventually, they got into some tougher combat where they actually died, almost a full party wipe, but
people
the healer ran
dying
away.
in an MMORPG? You got to be kidding me.
I know, I was blown away. They ran through a bit of a dungeon and got down to a boss fight, which was clearly not designed for 3 people. It was a full thing. There were some things that weren't implemented too, like standing in lava didn't hurt them and stuff like that. But the general feeling around the internet and in the Ashes of Creation circles is that people were very relieved to have some MMO footage to drool over, because the game has been in that weird battle royale state for a long time. And I actually had a short back and forth with the community manager, Margaret Kron, I'm not sure how she pronounces it. And she was a little defensive of the people's remarks about, finally some MMO stuff is coming out. And she said that they've been releasing MMO footage for months now with their Creature Creation series. And I kind of counted her with, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but I said those videos were never in context of anything. They looked exactly what they were meant to be, which is just advertising. It wasn't transparency of development or, showing anything tangible. It was just art assets. And like in the grand scheme of things, I think that's great. I love seeing art assets. I'm sure a lot of people do too. But you can't just show me a time lapse of an artist in ZBrush making a bear and expect me to be wowed by its supposed long strides in MMO progress. You don't see any game systems being used. It's kind of, it's just hype. But now people have seen the world. They've seen the MMO in action, and we have actual context for these assets they've been making. And it looked great. I can't deny that the Alpha 1 preview was a great showing and perfectly timed. There's lots of Chronicles of Valyria players who are without a home right now and they don't know where to go. And games like Defend the Night and Ashes of Creations will be a great place for them to find that home. There's still a lot that's unknown about Ashes. There's a lot of ground that they got to make up, with a large portion of the community was pretty upset with the whole Battle Royale choices they made for testing purposes. And hopefully they can make that up soon, because their Alpha 1 is actually going to be starting sometime in May for their higher tier backers. As the months progress, I think more and more Alpha 1 backers are going to get access, with a plan of a full, glorious Alpha 1 swing by fall of 2020.
I hear about this game a lot, but I haven't followed it. What were you going to say, Theric?
I was just going to say I'm sort of in the same boat as what you said, Minus, but I'm still taking a wait and see with this one. I think it's a very different type of game that they're going for rather than what we're looking at with Pantheon. I'm not sure it interests me. I have some issues with some of the pre-sale stuff that they're doing, the pre-sale cosmetics and all that stuff. So I'm just going to reserve judgment for now on this one.
I like a lot of the stuff you highlighted, Omega, like with the citywide community build project and these building. I've always had this theory that that MMORPGs sometimes get saturated by all these different gaming concepts. So sometimes the like world building stuff that's really popular now in a lot of games, I'm not sold yet on an MMO that does that I thoroughly enjoy. Again, like Theric said, I'll reserve judgment, because just because I haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it's not there. But that's an aspect of MMORPGs I could be without.
Next up, Defend the Night. On March 28th, they were again on top of their Twitter game with a sneak peek at some more of their ever-haunting game world. For those of you that don't know, Defend the Night is a dark fantasy MMO being developed by Ninja Loot Games, and they tweeted out that, quote, "We've been working on lots of optimization and bug fixes after another round of group testing last week, and we had some fun adding both legit chests and our first traps to the seditious Sanctum dungeon." You guys, you got to check it out. Either if it's on Twitter or Reddit, wherever you can find this video, you guys got to see it. It was hilarious to me, and it's really good to see a bit of dark humor come out from their dark fantasy game as well.
Yeah, it sounds
made
pretty
me
cool.
laugh. This one, the chest. Yeah, I won't say too much. Yeah, watch it. It's funny. And you brought up something really cool about Defend the Night that makes them stand out to me. They're really going hard on this dark fantasy game, and it's pretty cool because there's nothing that's really doing it to that extent right now, and pretty into that.
Yeah. If you guys are interested in Defend the Night, they have an upcoming event. They're going to be doing a live Q&A stream. Pretty sure it's a Q&A with Simmerg. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Over on Twitch. It's kind of like what they did a few weeks back on PantheonPlus U. And you should be able to find the link to Simmerg's channel in the description below us here. Next up, Ascent Infinite Realm is now redubbed as Elion. April 1st, kind of an odd piece of news about Ascent Infinite Realm. If you don't know, Ascent Infinite Realm, or Air, was a Korean MMO being developed by Bluehole Studios, same studio that brought us Terra. It was supposed to be a sort of steampunkish world with airships and real-time combat in the air and a more traditional tab target ground combat system. Over the past year or so, they've been really silent about the game after their last Thailand beta they did, and the reason for that silence has finally been revealed. They are rebranding the game as Elion and doing a complete overhaul of its systems. It's now far less emphasis on anything airship combat related, and instead sticking to the ground with more action-style combat. I think the switch was a really good idea for the studio. They have a great pedigree in action combat with Terra. I look forward to seeing more about Elion. I have a real soft spot for the steampunk aesthetic. I think it's really cool and has the potential to capture a lot of imagination in people. Like, you don't see a lot of steampunk things.
Yeah, you don't. For something as cool as steampunk is, and it has a very cult following, you'd think there'd be more.
It does. I think it has the potential to be really costumey in a lot of people's eyes, and it totally does. It's a made-up universe. But I love the idea of mixing science and mystical arts and all that kind of stuff. Next up is New World. Not really weekly news this week, but it's coming. So some future-proof news. The closed beta will be happening at some point in April. If people don't know, New World is an open-world fantasy or faction-based MMO set in an alternate history in the twilight of the Age of Exploration. It takes place on the fictional and supernatural island of Eternum in the 17th century. There are 3 factions to choose from, and from what I'm hearing, once you make that choice, you can only form a guild or a company in that game of that same faction. So if you want to play with your friends, that's really important to note. The 3 factions are the Marauders, the Syndicate, and the Covenant, and I'm actually in the process of making some info videos for New World, which I'll be putting out on my very own brand spanking new YouTube channel. I'm going to be streaming the beta, so stay tuned to the Pantheon Plus Discord for any info on my channels when I launch them. Hopefully, before
we'll definitely get
Sunday.
those out there for sure. You guys got to make sure once he gets his channels up and running, go show that support. I'm excited to see it because I don't know what I want to do. So you're going to be important. If you're the make or break for me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. I'm in the same boat. I don't know enough to make a decision about New World, but I'm going to be watching that stuff and making a decision based on what you do.
Right on. I got to do really good then.
Yep, we're holding you to this.
Right on. If anyone is curious about the factions, the devs actually put out a personality quiz, and you can answer, I think it's like 10 questions or something like that, to see what kind of faction you'd fit into. I took the quiz. It was a little predictable. You could really tell what you're getting from the answers, but it was fun. I liked it. It gives you good insight to the minds that designed the factions and why they chose those things. And turns out I belong to the Syndicate, which I think is very fitting. They're all cloak and dagger and mystical ancient knowledge and that type of thing. So, but the game is a bit of a controversial one. It's had an interesting development ride through its 3 or 4 years so far. It used to be a full loot hardcore PvP game. It's now a PvE kind of opt-in PvP game, and they've garnered quite a bit of backlash from the fans and the early alpha testers. There are some who fear that the Switch came too late in development and the game is going to lack structure and content when it comes out. But regardless where you land on that argument, I think as Amazon's flagship game, they're really going to want to get it right. They're rich beyond belief. They're going to throw money at it until it's successful. And I think the game will probably likely launch with pretty light on PvE content and just kind of mold itself around community feedback at that point. So anyone who plays come beta and you want dungeons and raids, because I don't think there's any dungeons and raids in the game, which really could be make or break. But they've said that they're open to the idea. They talk about making dungeons all the time. They just don't know what they want to do with the game, which could be a little scary.
Yeah, that scares the hell out of me. Mm-hmm. Well, we have this PvP game, and I think we're going to go more PvE, but we really don't have I don't want to knock on it too bad. You said something extraordinarily correct there. You said that this is Amazon. They have a ton of money. And there was an article that just came out today that I read that they're going full force on a Amazon gaming studio. Yeah. And Smedley is going to be a big part of that. And you guys know who that is. And they already have multiple games in the works. Everything from fast-paced mobile in and outs to, from what I understand, multiple MMOs. So really interesting. They want to be in this industry and they do have more money than anybody. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I'll just add in the change in, like you mentioned, Omega, the change in focus late in the game is concerning. But on the plus side, I think, because it's such a big company making such a widely known game, they're going to have a lot of people playing it. And as we said earlier, the MMO populations are the core heart of the MMO. And if a lot of people are playing, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What Midas was saying, like they're going full on into being a game studio. They are actually making a new Lord of the Rings MMO right now. Some information came out about it, but it's not huge news, so I didn't add it in here. But they're hiring for a bunch of stuff, and it's going to be like an action focused MMO that takes place in the book things rather than the movie things. They want to have a whole different spin on the art. They state that very clearly in their hiring write-ups. So it's possible, and I might just being a little negative here, but it's possible that New World is just going to end up being a big test for what they want to do with Lord of the Rings, because that game is really early. And if people want PvP, they'll put more PvP in Lord of the Rings because it's going to be an IP that people want to play.
Yeah, when you have an IP that big, it does a lot of its own work. So, but you can mess up New World and fix it. You can't mess up Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, exactly. Lastly, in other MMO news is Saga of Leucemia. April 3rd, Saga of Leucemia, say that 5 times fast, opened up their servers to begin testing Phase 3 of the alpha. Anyone can go to the website, back the game, and gain alpha access for as little as $60 American, I'm pretty sure. And I think it's worth noting the prices of these packs. They're really reasonable from the lowest pack all the way up to the highest pack, and they all get you alpha access. They're not trying to sell a bunch of cosmetics. They're not trying to sell weird stuff in game that you don't even understand what it does, like the Ring of Awesome.
Makes you awesome.
Yeah, clearly it's in the name. Each tier just gets you more and more beta codes, essentially, to give out to your friends when that beta time comes. I think the highest tier pack gives you 7 extra beta codes, so you can run around in a full group of 8 with your friends when it's ready. TW Anderson, aka Renfail, has been doing quite a bit of streams showing off just what to expect in the alpha test too. He's not trying to sugarcoat anything. Like, he's being very real about the state of the game and what he wants dedicated testers to be doing. I've been really impressed and refreshed by Renfail's transparency on the streams. The last 2 Mondays when he's been on BattleAxTheater Live talking about the game, he's always been very upfront with where the game is at and what still needs work and where the influences come from. I think a lot of times devs, they don't want to toss out buzzwords from other games, but Saga Leucemia and Pantheon as well, they both don't mind comparing their systems to other games, and they want to talk about their inspirations because those are the same games that we've played, and we want to see that in our future games that we invest in. I think it's a really good thing for potential players to hear those kinds of things, and it paints a clear picture of what Stormhaven Studios has in mind for every aspect of their game. I can't wait to see how it progresses. Every MMO that's being worked on right now that has a focus on group play and more challenging, meaningful encounters, like, it's got my full support.
That game looks really interesting. And one of the things I find most interesting about Saga of Leucemia is that it comes from a story, a background story is the origin for this thing. And if you actually know that there's a novel, I think they put that novel out there with the story that this game is based on, which I love.
Yeah, and it started as a D&D campaign, like,
yes, that's what it was.
Well over a decade ago. Like, the lore for this world is going to be really, really deep. So,
always a good thing.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one to dive into.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for everything today. It was awesome talking to you about MMORPGs. And everybody who is listening, thank you for tuning into episode 1 of the PantheonPlus Rewind. This is our first episode. We have a lot to learn. The timing of how long this will last will be less than Pantheon Plus U, but who knows how long other than that. We want to make sure to get the information out to you, so that's important. But the big thing is it's always about community. So tell us what you guys think. Is this something you want to listen to? So leave us some comments in the YouTube comments below. But more importantly, we will definitely have this out to download in the description once we solidify where we want to host. So we may be a few weeks before we get that locked down, but check the description below. That'll give you a bunch of links to what we've talked about, and it'll give you eventually the ability to download. So before we go, anything from you two guys? How was your first podcast? with us?
Well, I mean, I'll speak for myself. I think it was really great. I enjoyed this conversation a whole heck of a lot. Lots of good information, and yeah, no, just I'm interested to hear any feedback in the comments. Like, any feedback is good feedback, whatever you think is valid. So yeah, no, I hope you guys enjoyed this as much as I did.
Yeah, I want to, just mirror what Theric said, give us some feedback. Me especially, like I'm going to be diving into this YouTube thing new, so give me some personal feedback as well. But just as listening, as you guys were talking, like I don't dive into the forums, I don't dive into the Reddit. That's not where my focus is for Pantheon. So it was really cool to hear those things that people are talking about in those other places.
Awesome. Well, join us next week and we'll have even more to talk about. Thank you again, guys. It was awesome.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Pantheon Plus Rewind. Be sure to follow Minus and all Pantheon Plus related content at Pantheon Plus on Twitter and Pantheon Plus on both Twitch and YouTube. Follow Theric at Pantheon Theric on Twitter, and be sure to follow Omega Contagion at Discord via the name Omega Contagion 6023, and of course in the Facebook group Pantheon MMORPG. Until next time.